Hello, everybody. This is Jennifer Schilling from the Monroe Township Library. Happy Halloween in advance. And I'm here to read you a special spooky story of the supernatural. When I was a kid, a sort of subset of the after-school special was something called CBS Library. This was an hour or half-hour long special that would have some kind of framed story that would link together dramatizations or animated versions of certain stories in order to encourage kids to check these books out at the library. It could be anything from picture books to famous short stories to excerpts from novels. They had a Halloween one that was hosted by Vincent Price, a Dr. Dolittle themed one with Anthony Newley as the good doctor. And the one I remember most, because it got a lot of airplay on HBO when I was 11 or 12, was one called The Great Book Escape, about a young teen girl who was trapped overnight in the library, locked in when she didn't notice they were closing up. And several book characters came to life out of their books to try to help her solve her problem. And one of the stories spotlighted was this one called The Ghost in the Shed by Marilynne K. Roach, which was part of a larger work for tweens, but it's just as good for young adults or even regular adults. It was called Encounters with the Invisible World, and it was 10 stories of the supernatural taking place in colonial and Revolutionary War era New England. I don't know what it is. From H.P. Lovecraft to Stephen King, I don't know what it is about New England that invites stories of the supernatural. Maybe it's a Salem influence. I don't know. But it's a very good collection, and this is the first story in the collection, and the one that started it all, the one that sparked my interest in checking out the book, The Ghost in the Shed. There was once a peddler who arrived with his pack of goods at a remote farmhouse in the Green Mountains of Vermont just as dusk was falling. He asked if he might pass the night there, since it was a 6-hour walk to the nearest inn. The farmer and his sons agreed, and acted very glad to have him. In fact, they were so glad that before the sun came up again, they had murdered the peddler, robbed him, and buried the body under the dirt floor of the shed behind the kitchen. They got away with it, too. As the years passed, more settlers came to that region. The son who inherited the house sold it and moved further west where he could carry on the family traditions undisturbed. The new owners were a perfectly law-abiding and God-fearing family, but they had no more knowledge of the peddler than if he had never existed in the first place. Though the peddler's skeleton moldered beneath the dirt floor, his troubled spirit was still too upset to leave. In life, he had been a modest, unassuming fellow, but there was a vast deal of difference between being modest and being murdered. That loutish farmer had killed him in bed with no more consideration than he would have shown to a weed in his turnip field. The peddler, who had never harmed anybody, had woken from a sound sleep to find himself dead, and he had gotten over it. The new people in the house were pleasant enough, but totally unaware of him. They ate all their meals in the big kitchen only a few feet away from his grave, and they didn't even know his name. Being ignored this way rankled them so that he was unable to leave. While he didn't relish spending eternity in a shed, the peddler's ghost was determined that someone should realize he was there before he moved on. It became an obsession. So he began by opening the door between the shed and the kitchen. Next morning while he watched, the farm wife came down to make breakfast and shut the door without even looking at it. The ghost opened the door again that night. At dawn, the eldest son walked right through without noticing, tramped over the grave, and went out the back of the shed to the woodpile. On the third morning, the farmer came through from the outside with a bucket in each hand and kicked the door shut behind him. After a week of this, the peddler's ghost began opening the door by day as well as by night. All that happened was that the younger children were blamed for letting in drafts, and the children accused each other of being the culprit. This caused a bit more stir, but still wasn't getting anywhere. Next, the ghost began opening the door every time someone tried to shut it. At first, the family just closed it again, but soon they noticed it wasn't working the way it used to. When the door slowly swung open in full sight of breakfast, the farmer told his eldest son to fix a latch. The boy tinkered for the better part of the morning, and at noon the door opened. The farmer told him to fix it right next time. But at dinner the door swung open again. The farmer sighed and said he'd do it himself. He did, and at breakfast the door was wide open. The farmer slammed it shut as hard as he could and spent the morning rehanging the entire door. This took so long that he had to work in the fields until after dark, and when he finally went in for dinner, the shed door was open. He banged on the table and vowed he'd fetch a lock from town. It took the whole next day to do it, but before the family went to bed that night, the farmer had installed a small but sturdy lock on the door and hung the key on a nail driven into the frame. The peddler was not pleased, but neither was he deterred. At dawn, the door stood open as usual. The farmer began sleeping with the key on a cord around his neck. Still, the door kept opening. He rehung the door a second time, sat at the sill, checked the pintles, and added a strong bolt under the lock. The door swung open as soon as his back was turned. Now the ghost was tired of being polite and made a point of shooting the bolt as loudly as he could. He'd rattle the lock and fling the door open so hard it banged back against the wall. The farmer pushed a heavy chest in front of the door at night. By morning, the chest was across the room and the door was standing open. He bought a bigger lock, and every night the ghost removed it, nails and all. It got so the family would lie awake, hearing a thunk as the bolt shot open, 4 separate pings as the nails flew out of the hasp and eye which held the lock, and the thud as the lock fell on the floor with them. And there would be a sharp rattle as the latch lifted up, followed by a crash of a musket shot as the door slammed open against the wall. There was now a sizable hole in the plaster where the latch kept hitting it. It was bad enough at night, but when the peddler repeated his performance during Sunday dinner, the farmer ran to the barn for his toolbox. This time he nailed the door shut with a 6-inch spike. As soon as he left the room, the spike flew across the kitchen with a loud whizzing sound and embedded itself in the opposite wall. The hardware followed like grape shot. The farmer galloped back into the room, just in time to see the door fall forward and smack face down on the floor. The farmer took to his bed for 3 days. When he recovered, he put the door back on its hinges and then pretended it didn't exist. He sat with his back to it at meals and went in and out of the house by the front door. He ordered the rest of the family to do the same, and they were nervous enough to be glad to obey. This did not suit the ghost at all. For a time he remained silent by way of apology, but when a week had passed and the family was still going up the front door and around the house with a wood pile every time they needed kindling, he began slamming the door at intervals. They ignored it. He left it open day and night. They acted as if the opening were a brick wall. He banged around in the shed, and they moved the family prayers to the second floor. Finally, he could bear it no more. There was a tremendous crash in the middle of the night, and the whole family piled into the kitchen to find that the entire shed had collapsed into splinters. The farmer swore blue blazes. Ripping the teeth from his neck, he hurled it at the gaping door at the empty night. As soon as it was daylight, the farmer and the eldest son attacked the pile of debris, intending to haul it as far away as they could and burn the lot. They shoveled the smaller pieces into a cart, and they began wrestling the corner posts out of the ground. These had been tilted at quite an angle when the shed collapsed, so that as the farmer levered them out, they displaced a good deal of the dirt floor. They also displaced a leg bone. The whole family gathered and gaped. Carefully, the farmer uncovered the rest of the bones and the shredded remains of the peddler's pack. Everyone was thinking the same thing, and no one dared say it. The eldest son picked up a corroded piece of metal and rubbed the dirt off it. It was a watch case, broken, but inscribed with a name. The farmer took it, peered at the grooves, and read it aloud. It says Samuel Pym. Behind them, the peddler sighed. Yes, that was his name. The family called in the constable and the minister, and between them all it was decided that the bones belonged to someone cruelly murdered and deserving of a decent Christian burial. The next Sunday, the bones were reinterred in the local burying ground beneath a simple stone reading Samuel Pym. After that, the shed door behaved itself. You can find the animated version of The Ghost in the Shed, which was a part of that special I was telling you about, on YouTube if you're interested in seeing it, narrated by George Goebel. You can also find the book Encounters with the Invisible World on archive.org. Unfortunately, it is out of print, and we no longer have it at our library, although we used to. But if you sign up for an archive.org account, you can find this book and loads of other out-of-print books. I'm Jennifer Schilling, and I hope you enjoyed today's reading.